So we've taken a look at Reddit.com and KhanAcademy.com, and we've seen that there are layers involved with both websites. Both have content on there, both have style on there, and both have some behavior on there that we might not have noticed. You know, nowadays these layers kind of just melt into the background of the web page, and you're not really noticing it unless you're actively trying to, learn how it's made or actually trying to appreciate it. You're just on a website, and if it works good, you're happy about that. And as the end user, that's a good thing. That's what the designers should want. They shouldn't want to be, overbearing with style or behavior. It should just be natural and seamless. And as we've looked at content, style, and behavior in that hierarchy, let's look at the programs or the technologies involved with making those come to life. As I said before, when we write HTML, we are concerned with the content. We're concerned with what actually goes on the page. So if there's a paragraph on there, we're concerned with that. If there's a list, we're concerned with writing that with the HTML. The images are fed through HTML for the most part. That is the stuff that we are concerned with right now, and what we're concerned with when we actually make the skeleton of a website is let's get the content on there first, and then let's add the style, and then let's add the behavior. That's, for the most part, I think, how it's done and how it's recommended to be done, is we get the content on there first. When we move on from HTML, though, we're going to be introduced to another technology called CSS, which is the sister technology to HTML. When you learn web design, I should say, you're kind of learning these things in conjunction with one another. You learn HTML, then you learn the CSS that goes along with the HTML that you just learned. CSS, as we can see here, stands for Cascading Style Sheets. That'll make a lot more sense when we start looking at what a style sheet is and the cascading effect that it actually manifests itself in. It's a pretty name, Cascading Style Sheets. I'd name my daughter that. But the CSS will style the page for us. So with CSS, we can create background colors. We can create divisions in our page. I shouldn't say create divisions in our page, but we can style the divisions in our page a certain way. The top taskbar on Facebook, that blue nav bar that we see, that can be coded with CSS. The layout of YouTube can be coded with CSS. The CSS is the style. This is how websites look, how they look. We then move on to behavior, which is the interactivity and interactions that's involved in the user experience that goes into making a website. That is probably most easily done in a programming language called JavaScript, or for you purists, a scripting language called JavaScript. JavaScript can add behavior to our website. It can make things happen. When we click on the mouse, for example, JavaScript can alert us something, or JavaScript can make something happen on the page. If we submit a form, JavaScript can look at that form before we submit it to the server and make sure everything, checks out, and make sure that we have, 8 or more characters on a password, or that a certain field is filled in. JavaScript can do this. JavaScript can pull information from a different server and display it on our page. JavaScript makes things look more natural. That's also the last tier that we'll look at in Web Design Workshop, however far away that is from now, is we're going to look at JavaScript after. And learning that is a totally different concept than HTML and CSS, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to learn. When you're researching HTML right now, you're going to come across HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And it's important to know what those are, and it's important to know when those are used. So let's go back to Khan Academy right now, and let's maybe point out the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript on the page. Alright, so I am back here at KhanAcademy.com, or .org actually. Oh, I didn't even notice that. Now that we know what to look for, now that we know that HTML is content, CSS is style, and JavaScript is behavior, let's start pointing this out. We looked at before that this header here is HTML. Perfect. The backgrounds that we're seeing here, those are generated by CSS. So CSS tells us which backgrounds to use and when. We see that the backgrounds changing colors depending on our position on the scroll area. So obviously these backgrounds, these divisions of the page have a height and perhaps a width to them as well, saying that, after a certain width or after a certain height, let's move on to the next one. Let's see what's there. That's styling. These are formatted in, certain columns over here, which is all done by CSS. Now the behavior that we saw earlier, such as the hover effect that we see here, that can be done either with CSS or JavaScript. And when we move on to the last chapter of this course, we'll start looking at what CSS can do. That's actually pretty cool. But this is both style and behavior. The style is the color, and the behavior is the effect itself. Also with behavior, when I move my mouse over on the top bar here and put it into focus, it brings up that little fade effect that brings us into focus. That's behavior, and that's done via JavaScript. Or that could be done with JavaScript. Now we looked at parabolas last time. Let's go ahead and do the same thing again. You notice that when I type that, this little loading square comes in. That's generated via JavaScript as well. And these results are also generated via JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually looking, or JavaScript is potentially looking in, the back end and seeing what the database of this website has that match Parabola. And obviously Parabola matches these videos that show up, or these exercises that show up. Now that is behavior that shows up when I click on this login as well. It brings us to this page. I can type in something else though. If it doesn't match a certain thing, something should pop up. Yeah, your login or password is incorrect. That is behavior as well. And that can be done via JavaScript. So just on this one page on Khan Academy, we've seen content, style, and behavior. We've seen 3 layers of web design all work together to make a seamless experience. So hopefully you guys start taking a look at this stuff and start maybe trying to pinpoint certain aspects of websites, which is the content, which is the style, which is the behavior. It's a fun time. Go do it.